The cold was a living thing in my workshop, a constant companion that clung to my clothes and settled deep in my bones. I didn't mind it. The sub-zero temperature of the industrial freezer was the price of admission for my art, a sanctuary, where water became glass and my chainsaws and chisels could coax form from frozen, featureless blocks. My life's work was to create temporary beauty, to carve intricate sculptures that were born to die. Swans were my specialty. Their elegant, curving necks and delicate feathers a perfect challenge for the unforgiving medium of ice. I was an artist on the fringes, my finances a perpetual roller coaster. But in the heart of the walk-in freezer, surrounded by the hum of the compressors and the blank, crystalline canvases waiting for me, I felt a sense of purpose that was pure and absolute. One bleak, rain-swept afternoon, he walked in. His name was Mr. Thorne, and he was as out of place in my gritty, water-stained workshop as a diamond in a coal bin. His suit was immaculately tailored, his shoes shone despite the miserable weather outside, and he carried an expensive leather briefcase that he refused to set down on any of my workbenches. He wanted to commission a centerpiece for the upcoming Civic Benefactors Gala, a high-profile charity event that was the talk of the city's elite. The fee he offered was staggering, more than I typically made in 3 months. It was the kind of money that could pay my rent for the rest of the year and upgrade my failing freezer unit. It was an offer a man in my position could not refuse. He seemed unusually fascinated by the process, asking pointed questions, not just about the design, but about the structural integrity of the ice. He walked around a half-finished sculpture of a phoenix, tapping it gently with a manicured finger. "Is it possible to make something hollow?" he asked, his voice a low, smooth baritone. "Or to embed an object within the ice itself, so that it is completely invisible from the outside?" I was flattered by his technical interest. Assuming he was just a wealthy eccentric, I explained the techniques, how I could freeze a piece in layers, carving out a cavity before sealing it with a final layer of clear ice and a slurry of shaved ice that would freeze seamlessly, leaving no trace of the intrusion. He listened intently, a thin, unreadable smile on his lips. As he was preparing to leave, having agreed on a design of 2 intertwined swans, he placed his briefcase on my cleanest table, clicked it open, and produced a tiny, black USB flash drive. "I have a peculiar request, Mr. Rosk," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with an unnerving intensity. "The guest of honor at this gala is Councilman Julian Croft, a dear friend. I want to give him a small, discreet gift, a surprise. I need you to place this drive deep inside the larger swan, where you described he and I have an arrangement for how he will retrieve it." The request was bizarre, a flicker of red in my peripheral vision, but my mind was already spending the commission fee, a surprise gift, a rich man's game, an inside joke. I could rationalize it 100 different ways. I took the small, cold piece of plastic from his outstretched hand. It felt foreign and heavy with unspoken implications, a tiny black mark against the pristine, transparent world I inhabited. The unease was a knot in my stomach, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room, but the desperation for financial security was a louder voice. I convinced myself it was just another eccentricity of the ultra-wealthy, a world whose rules I didn't need to understand as long as their checks cleared. "Of course, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. "Consider it done." I should have known then. I should have seen the glint in his eye and understood that I was no longer just an artist. I was an accomplice. The grand ballroom of the Regent Hotel was a different universe of cold. It was the calculated, architectural chill of marble floors and cavernous ceilings, a stark contrast to the organic, working cold of my freezer. I felt clumsy and out of place in my rented tuxedo, a blue-collar artist adrift in a sea of glittering diamonds and tailored silk. In the center of the room, illuminated by a soft blue spotlight, my creation stood magnificent. The 2 ice swans, their necks intertwined, their feathers catching the light like 1,000 tiny prisms, were perhaps the best work I had ever done. They were beautiful, silent, and perfect. And deep within the heart of the larger swan, nestled in a frozen cavity, sat Thorne's little black secret. I was a nervous wreck, my hands sweating, my gaze constantly darting around the room. I saw him across the floor, Councilman Julian Croft. He was the picture of civic leadership, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his smile wide and reassuring, as he shook hands and posed for photos. He was a man who radiated power and charisma, the kind of public figure whose face was plastered on billboards and news programs. This was the man who was about to receive a surprise gift hidden inside, my art, Watching him laugh, completely unaware of the role he was about to play, sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. My sculpture was no longer a piece of art. It was a prop in a drama I didn't understand. A silent, frozen courier, waiting to complete its delivery. The moment came an hour into the gala. As Thorn had instructed, I was to watch for the signal. A specific waiter, carrying a tray of empty champagne flutes, would nod at Croft as he passed. I saw it happen, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture. A few moments later, Croft excused himself from a conversation and made his way towards the centerpiece. A look of thoughtful admiration on his face for the benefit of any onlookers. He circled the sculpture slowly, his fingers tracing the edge of a wing, looking for all the world like a true patron of the arts. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. I wanted to scream, to stop him, to shatter the swans and expose the whole charade. But I was frozen, a spectator at my own crime. He found the spot I had described to Thorn. A small, almost invisible seam on the underside of the main swan's wing. It was sealed with a plug of ice I had carved separately. His movements were fluid and practiced. His hand brushed against the sculpture, and with a deftness that spoke of planning, he worked the plug free, palmed the tiny USB drive, and slipped the frozen plug back into place. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. To anyone watching, it looked like he had done nothing more than touch the sculpture. It was seamless, brilliant, and utterly terrifying. He had the package. The drop was complete. My part in the transaction was over. He turned from the sculpture, his public smile firmly back in place. But I was close enough to see the sheen of sweat on his brow. The slight tremor in the hand that now rested in his pocket, clutching the drive. From across the room, my eyes met Mr. Thorne's. He wasn't smiling. He simply gave me a slow, deliberate nod, a cold acknowledgement of a job well done. In that single, chilling gesture, all of my rationalizations evaporated. This was not a gift. This was not a game. This was a dead drop. This was something ugly and dangerous. And I was standing right in the middle of it. A wave of nausea and panic washed over me. I turned and fled the opulent ballroom, stumbling out into the cold night air. My art, my name, and my future feeling, irrevocably tainted. The following morning, the city felt menacing. Every news headline, every whispered conversation I overheard at the corner coffee shop, felt like a potential threat. I obsessively scoured the internet, my hands shaking as I typed Councilman Croft's name into the search bar. The gala was mentioned, of course, a fluff piece with a photo of my swans prominently featured, a beautiful monument to my own stupidity. Then I found it. A small, dry article on the city's financial news page. Councilman Croft, a longtime champion of the proposed waterfront revitalization project, had unexpectedly withdrawn his support, citing newfound fiscal concerns. His reversal had effectively killed the billion-dollar project. The dots connected, with a sickening jolt. The USB drive wasn't a gift. It was leverage. It was blackmail. Later that day, a sleek black car pulled up outside my workshop. A courier in a sharp uniform, looking as out of place as Thorn had, handed me an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for double the amount we had agreed upon. There was no note, no explanation, just the money. It wasn't a bonus for a job well done. It was a down payment on my silence. The crisp paper felt disgusting in my hands, a dirty, illicit thing that implicated me further in their sordid transaction. I wanted to tear it up, to burn it, but I knew that would be a meaningless and childish gesture. The money was proof. I had been paid for my role as a delivery boy in a high-stakes blackmail scheme. And now I was inextricably linked to these dangerous men. A cold, creeping fear began to settle in my gut, a paranoia that felt as chilling as the air in my freezer. I was a witness. I was the man who had built the Trojan horse. What would happen if Croft decided to talk? What would happen if Thorn decided I was a loose end? These were not people who played by the rules. They were men who moved behind the scenes, pulling the strings of power with secrets and threats. My quiet, artistic life had been invaded, and I had no idea how to navigate this new, terrifying landscape. The solitude of my workshop, once a comfort, now felt like a trap. Its thin walls offering no protection from the world outside. I knew I couldn't go to the police. What would I say? That I willingly took a bag of cash to hide a mysterious object in a sculpture. I would be confessing to my part in a conspiracy I couldn't even begin to explain. I was trapped, a pawn in a game where I didn't even know the rules. I felt a desperate need to talk to someone, to confess, to get help. and only one name came to mind: Alina, my ex-girlfriend. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since our spectacular messy breakup. But Alina was an investigative journalist. She was smart, fearless, and she understood the city's dark underbelly better than anyone I knew. She was the only person who might understand the danger I was in. Swallowing my pride felt like swallowing shards of glass. Our relationship had ended because I was a coward, unwilling to commit, unable to handle the intensity of her life. Now, I was about to crawl back to her, not as a lover, but as a terrified source begging for help. I found her number in my phone, my thumb hovering over the call button for what felt like an eternity. The thought of hearing her voice, of admitting how stupid and scared I was humiliating. But the fear of what Thorn and his associates might do was far greater. With a trembling hand and a heart full of dread, I made the call, praying she wouldn't just hang up on me. We met in a place that held no memories for us. A greasy spoon diner halfway across the city with cracked vinyl booths and the lingering smell of stale coffee. The relentless afternoon rain streaked down the windows, mirroring the bleak, miserable state of my life. Alina slid into the booth opposite me, looking exactly the same, yet completely different. She was a journalist to her core, her eyes sharp and assessing, her posture exuding a weary, cynical confidence. She didn't offer a smile or a greeting, just a raised eyebrow that clearly asked, what could possibly be so important that I would crawl out of the woodwork after a year of silence? The tension between us was a palpable, uncomfortable thing, a chasm of unspoken history and resentment. With my hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug of coffee, the story spilled out of me. I told her everything, from Thorn's bizarre request to the silent, terrifying transaction at the gala, and the news about the waterfront project. I didn't try to hide my own stupidity or greed, laying my foolishness bare on the grimy Formica tabletop between us. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. For a terrifying moment, I thought she was going to laugh at me, or worse, just get up and walk away, leaving me to stew in the mess I had created. Admitting my role in the whole affair to her, the woman whose trust I had already broken once before, was one of the hardest things I had ever done. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, just staring at me with those intelligent, penetrating eyes. So, let me get this straight, she said finally, her voice flat and devoid of sympathy. A rich, scary man offered you a mountain of cash to be a willing accomplice in what was obviously a criminal conspiracy. And your first thought wasn't to call the cops, but to take the money and then, only when you got scared, to call the ex-girlfriend whose life you blew up. The words were a slap in the face, but she wasn't wrong. Beneath her anger, however, I saw a flicker of something else, the unmistakable glint of a journalist who smells a story. The names Thorn and Croft had clearly registered with her. "I'll look into it," she said, her tone shifting from angry ex to calculating professional. "But let's be clear about the terms, Marcus. This isn't about us. This isn't about me saving you. You are a source. My source. You will tell me everything you know, answer every question I have, and you will do exactly as I say. I am not your friend right now, and I am not your therapist. I am chasing a story, and you are the key to unlocking it. Can you handle that?" It was a cold, transactional arrangement, but it was also a lifeline. I had a choice: remain a terrified victim, or become a tool for the truth. It was the first glimmer of a path out of the darkness. We spent the next hour in that dingy diner, her grilling me for every single detail about Thorn, his appearance, his exact words, the car he drove, the courier service he used. My artist's eye for detail, once used for capturing the curve of a swan's wing, was now being used to reconstruct the architecture of a crime. We were a strange, unlikely alliance, bound together by my mistake and her ambition. The primary obstacle was no longer just my fear, but our complete lack of hard evidence and the very real danger posed by the men we were about to investigate. As I left the diner and walked back out into the cold, persistent rain, I didn't feel safe, but for the first time in days, I no longer felt completely alone. The days that followed were an immersion into a world of shadows I never knew existed. My workshop, once my sanctuary, became our clandestine headquarters. Elena worked with a focused intensity that was both terrifying and on. She taught me about burner phones, encrypted messaging, and the art of counter-surveillance. My life, which had been governed by the slow, deliberate pace of art, was now dictated by the frantic, paranoid rhythm of an investigation. I recounted my conversations with Thorn so many times that his smooth, menacing voice seemed to be a permanent echo in my head. I, the sculptor who worked with solid, tangible things, was now dealing in whispers, theories, and dangerous secrets. Elena's world was one of hushed phone calls, with sources she would only identify by code names, of late nights spent corporate ownership records and campaign finance disclosures. She showed me the intricate web of shell corporations and holding companies that Thorn used to disguise his business dealings. A complex, deliberately opaque structure designed to hide the truth. I was getting a first-hand education in the grimy mechanics of power and corruption that operated just beneath the surface of the city I thought I knew. I watched her work, fueled by black coffee and a righteous anger. And my admiration for her grew, tangled up with the shame of how I had treated her in the past. The first warning came on a Tuesday morning. I arrived at my workshop to find a message spray-painted across the large metal loading door. It was a single, stylized image of a swan, rendered in a stark, dripping black. There was no mistaking the message. It was a clear, cold signal from Thorn's world to mine. We know who you are. We are watching you. The fear, which had subsided into a low-grade anxiety, came roaring back, primal and sickening. I felt exposed, vulnerable. My quiet corner of the world had been marked, and the threat was no longer theoretical. It was painted on my front door. Things escalated a few days later. Elena had been digging into a series of real estate transactions, connected to one of Thorn's shell corporations and the now-defunct waterfront project. She was getting close to something tangible. That night, someone broke into her apartment. They weren't after valuables. They were after information. They took her laptop, her notebooks, and her backup drives. It was a professional job, clean and quiet. It was a direct, violent response to her investigation. A clear sign that we had stirred the nest, and Thorn was not afraid to use force and intimidation to protect his secrets. The danger had moved from a painted threat to a physical violation. That break-in could have been the end of it. It would have been the rational moment to stop, to walk away before one of us got seriously hurt. But seeing Elena's fury, her absolute refusal to be intimidated, ignited something in me. Her courage was contagious. I realized that my initial fear had been passive, the terror of a cornered animal. Now, I felt a new emotion beginning to surface. Anger. They had threatened us, violated our lives, and used my art as their weapon. I could no longer stand by as a frightened source. I had to become an active participant in the fight. My personal growth depended on it. I had to stop being the victim of the story and start helping to write its ending. We were at a dead end. Elena's contacts were getting spooked. Her digital trail had been wiped out with a stolen laptop. And Thorn had retreated behind a wall of lawyers and plausible deniability. We had a strong theory, a compelling narrative, of corruption and blackmail, but we had no hard evidence. The USB drive was gone, and our word meant nothing against a man like Thorn. Frustration hung heavy in the air of my workshop, a cold fog of defeat. We needed a new strategy, something bold and unexpected, something to lure the snake out of its hole. We needed to set a trap. The idea came to me late one night, surrounded by the tools of my trade. If my art had been the instrument of the crime, perhaps it could also be the instrument of justice. What if I became the bait? We make him think there's another deal, I said to Elena, the plan forming in my mind even as I spoke. I contact Thorn. I tell him I have a new client, a wealthy, discreet collector, who is so impressed by the service I provided at the gala that he wants to arrange a similar special delivery of his own. We create a scenario he can't resist. It was a wild, incredibly dangerous gambit. I would have to willingly walk back into the lion's den. Elena was skeptical at first, her protective instincts warring with her journalistic ones. But the more we talked it through, the more it seemed like our only option. We spent 2 days building our legend. We created a fake online profile for a reclusive tech billionaire, our new client. We carefully crafted a script for my phone call, anticipating Thorn's questions and suspicions. Making that call was the most terrifying performance of my life. My voice was shaking, but I channeled the memory of Thorn's own cool arrogance. To my utter astonishment, his greed outweighed his caution. He agreed to a meeting to discuss the details. The trap was set. We chose the venue with meticulous care. It would be at the upcoming opening of a new exhibit at the city's contemporary art gallery, a public place, crowded and full of witnesses, where any overt violence would be impossible. Elena worked her magic, pulling in favors from a trusted contact at a local news station. They would have a team there, posing as an arts journalism crew, with high-definition cameras and sensitive directional microphones. She would be nearby, feeding me lines and questions through a tiny, invisible earpiece. The goal was simple: get Thorn on tape, acknowledging the nature of his business, specifically referencing the Croft deal as a credential for his discreet services. The night before the gallery opening, the fear was a physical presence, a knot of ice in my stomach. This was no longer just about exposing a crime. It was about me taking back my own agency. I was no longer the naive artist, the unwitting pawn. I was an active participant, using my own creativity and courage to confront the man who had exploited me. I was terrified of what could go wrong, but for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a flicker of power. The fear was no longer the passive dread of a victim, but the sharp, focused adrenaline of a hunter who has set his trap and is waiting for his prey to walk into it. The gallery was a chaotic symphony of chatter, clinking glasses, and modern art that I found both fascinating and pretentious. I stood near a large, abstract metal sculpture, trying to look casual, but my heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Elena's voice was a calm, steady presence in my ear, a lifeline in the sea of noise and anxiety. Then I saw him, Mr. Thorn, looking as sleek and predatory as ever, moved through the crowd with an effortless confidence that made my stomach churn. He spotted me and headed over, a shock closing in. This was it. The performance of my life was about to begin. Mr. Roski began, his voice smooth as silk. I was intrigued by your call. Following Elena's guidance, I played the part of the nervous intermediary, eager to impress my new client. I steered the conversation towards the need for absolute discretion, hinting at the sensitive nature of the package. My client needs assurance, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He was impressed by your work with Councilman Croft. He needs that same level of finesse. Thorn's ego swelled. Mr. Croft was a delicate situation, he boasted, his voice dropping conspiratorially. He required a firm, persuasive argument to see reason. My methods are always effective. He had said it. He had connected himself to the blackmail. Elena's voice in my ear was triumphant. We got it, Marcus. Walk away now. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Elena's story, backed by the irrefutable video and audio evidence, exploded across the city. It was a massive scandal, triggering a full-blown investigation that reached the highest levels of city government. Thorn and Croft were arrested, their empires of greed and intimidation crumbling under the weight of their own arrogance. True to her word, Elena had protected me. My name was never mentioned. I was simply a confidential source. The public knew the crime had happened, but the artist who sculpted the Swan remained a ghost, a phantom in the story. I was safe. I was free. I returned to my workshop. The black swan that had been spray-painted on my door was gone, scrubbed away, leaving only a faint shadow. The air inside felt different, cleaner. The cold was just cold again, no longer menacing. I picked up my tools and approached a fresh block of ice. But this time, I wasn't carving a swan. I was carving something abstract, something jagged and powerful, a reflection of the chaos I had endured and survived. My art was no longer just about creating fleeting beauty. It was about expressing a difficult, complicated truth. My relationship with Elena had been reforged too, built now not on a fraught romantic past, but on a foundation of mutual respect, shared danger, and a hard-won victory. My journey through that dark world taught me something profound. It taught me that secrets, like objects embedded in ice, can never stay hidden forever. Eventually, the thaw always comes. I learned that true strength isn't about being fearless. It's about acting in spite of your fear. We all face moments where we feel like pawns in someone else's game, where our own story feels like it's being written for us. But the pen is always in our hands, even when we don't realize it. What part of this story resonated with you the most? We've all had moments where we felt in over our heads, where a simple choice led to unimaginable complications. Share your own story in the comments below about a time you had to find the courage to fight back. Your story matters, and it might just be the thing someone else needs to hear today. And if you believe that truth is worth fighting for, make sure to subscribe and share this with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength.